Hey guys, welcome back to the fanfic reread project. In this episode, we are continuing our reread of the first batch of Keep Breathing drafts with the first draft of part 4. Hey guys, editing Frankie here. So at this point, I basically just suggested that you guys go and read the current version of Keep Breathing because part 4, unlike some of the other parts, hasn't changed that much in the sequence of events, so much as it has changed in tone. But I went on and explained a bunch of stuff that's really just not relevant here. But anyway, let's jump right into the story. Okay, so you did what now? Jane shifted in her seat as the trailer bumped over the pockmarked street. The mess of monitors in front of her gave a simultaneous staticky buzz as it passed over another bump. She heard Pepper take a breath through the receiver and start again. I think I made a new element. See, that's what I thought you'd said. Jane gripped onto her desk as the trailer rolled off the road and toward the desert. How exactly did that happen? Well, I was in the house last night and I went down to the garage to check on Tony because he's been sick. And I think it was a particle accelerator. A particle accelerator? He just has one of those? Jane shook her head and backtracked. Of course he does. What am I saying? But he wasn't there? No, I guess he'd gone to sleep or something, but it was off when I got down there and I guess I panicked. And you turned it back on? Pepper, that's not... No, that's it. I didn't turn it on. That's what I was trying to do, but that's not what happened. Hey guys, editing Frankie here. So at this point, I realize that there is no context for what is happening during this part of the story, and I tried to explain what was happening, but it took me 3.5 minutes. So I'm gonna come in and try to explain more succinctly what the fuck was going on. Essentially, this entire beginning part, which it continues on past this, is a reference back to the events of the movie Iron Man 2. And essentially, Tony built the particle accelerator because he was suffering from palladium poisoning, and palladium, which is I think a type of metal, is used to power in part his arc reactor. The palladium started breaking down and it started leaking into his bloodstream, and that's how he got blood poisoning. So he built the particle accelerator in an effort to figure out if he could create this new element that his dad had found out about but couldn't make himself because he lacked the technology at the time. What Pepper did is, after Tony had gone to sleep without being able to successfully either get the element made or just use it, because I guess he went to sleep, Pepper came in and turned on the particle accelerator, implying with some type of magic. That's what's going on here. We can talk about the fact that I have to come in and fucking explain this to you, but let's not do that right now. Let's get back to the story. Jane sat forward. You're kidding. She put a hand over the receiver when a small monitor started to buzz. Here's good, Darcy, she said toward the front of the trailer, then turned back to her phone. How do you know it's new? Well, he said that palladium was the only thing that would work in his arc reactor, but then that stopped working, so I guess he was looking for something else that would. What did you tell him? I didn't, Pepper sputtered. I left, and the last time I saw him, he seemed fine. He didn't say anything. Jane let out a sigh. I want to. You know I want to, but he won't believe me. He's a natural skeptic. They always are. And what do most skeptics want? Proof. Hell, Pepper, I'm a skeptic too. Yeah, but you're already knee-deep into this. It's different. She sighed. I have to go. Jane could hear the sudden intrusion of voices and clicking cameras. So do I. Try not to do anything Victoria hear about. Pepper laughed. Of course. And then the call ended. There was a brief moment where Jane had to really process everything she just heard, but then she shook her head. She had work to do tonight, too. So let's pause here and talk about this opening, because we're going to read another version of it in the other draft of Thor that we're going to read in the next batch of things. So, as I sort of said, this was meant to be a connecting point between parts 3 and 4, as well as a way to show you that there was more to kind of like what happened in part 3 afterward. However, I feel like this is completely unnecessary. The real problem with this opening is that it doesn't add anything to the story we're about to read. It's literally just there as a way for you to figure out what happened in between parts 3 and 4. You don't learn anything about it that informs you of anything that you're about to read in this part. It's all about what happened with Pepper. It's got nothing to do with Jane. So, to me, it would have made more sense to just write a sequel to part 3 somewhere else than to shove this thing into part 4 to tie up its loose ends, if these even count as loose ends. So, yeah, it's just kind of weird that this is here, but it stuck around. It was in Keep Breathing for a really long time. I don't remember exactly when I rewrote part 4, because again, part 4 has stayed kind of the same throughout with just significant changes to like the setting and the tone and give or take a few characters. So I don't remember exactly when I cut this out, but it did eventually get dropped because I did realize like this has nothing to do with actually what happens in part 4. So moving on. "We're talkative tonight," Eric said as he helped her open the roof panels. "We're on the cutting edge of science," she said with a smile. She pulled down the ladder and then grabbed her jacket and the magnometer. I hope that's how you say that. "Is it just me, or is it really dark out here?" Darcy asked from the driver's seat. "It's not just you," Jane told her as she climbed onto the roof. "Hurry, I don't want you to miss it." There was a bang, a spat of cursing, and then Eric popped up beside her, his graying blonde hair sticking up. Jane grimaced. "Oh, watch your head." "Thanks," he said, rubbing a reddening spot at his temple. He looked up at the sky, and then his eyes went wide. "Oh my." Jane nodded in agreement. Usually the sky was filled with stars, the Milky Way stretching from one end to another, but tonight there was nothing. This was exactly how it had been most of the other times she's seen it too. "What's this anomaly of yours supposed to look like?" Eric asked her. "Well, it's a little different every time. One time there was a corner of the sky where the stars came back, but it looked like a puddle. And last week there was a faint rainbow where Orion should have been. They all have the same readings, though," she said, patting the magnometer beside her. "But the sky is always like this?" She nodded. "This is strange enough to be investigated on its own. I can't see a thing." Darcy, where's the champagne?" "Right here." Darcy reached down and pulled it off of the floor, but when she started to get up to give it to her, it floated right out of her hand. She shrugged and settled back into her seat. "Can I turn on the radio?" "Sure, if you like rocking out the KFRM," Jane scoffed. "Not until you see it." She slapped Eric's hand away from the foil at the top of the bottle. Alright, so let's pause here. So far, this story is not really giving me a good sense of the space that this is all taking place in. Like, clearly, yes, they are in a trailer and then they're in the desert. We heard about this stuff. But, like, just now, like that little bit where she asks Darcy where the champagne is. Like, I had no indication that we would be with Darcy when that happened, because I assume, like, so far it seems like it's been in Jane's POV, right? So then suddenly it's like Darcy reached down on the floor and then she settled back into her seat. And I'm like, oh, we're following a different character for this little moment. It's kind of confusing. I wish there was more indication of like where exactly. You know, this is actually a problem that the first version of Captain America we read last episode had, where Steve and Bucky, like, we know they're in an alley and then they're walking down the street, but the street and the alley have no kind of description. They're just a street and an alley. Let's keep going. She looked up and scanned the skies again. "That's strange. It's never taken this long before." She dropped back into the trailer to grab her notebook. She flipped through the worn pages, holding tight to the many pieces of folded loose leaf that had been stuffed inside. "The anomalies are always precipitated by geomagnetic storms," she said, half muttering to herself and half explaining the Selvig. "The last 17 occurrences have been predictable to the minute. I just don't understand." Darcy, who'd thrown her feet back onto the dashboard and started falling asleep, snapped back to wakefulness when she saw a flash of bright light. "Jane?" "See, now there you go. It just tells you, like, this is where Darcy is. She's down there, you know? So we're moving away from one character to another. I just feel like what it is that this setting has no actual sense of space. It's kind of like, here's a trailer, and then, like, you have no sense of how the trailer is set up, what they have to move around. And I'm not asking for, like, the most detailed description of the floor plan of this trailer. I'm just asking for something that I can actually visualize here that, like, doesn't change on a whim, or it just feels like it exists, you know? But anyway, she didn't seem to have heard her. "There's got to be some new variable or an equipment malfunction." At that same moment, the monitors at the back of the truck began to flicker in static. "I don't think there's anything wrong with your equipment," Darcy said. She climbed into the passenger side and looked out of the window. "Are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" Jane started to ask, but her question tapered off as she caught sight of the thing herself. Says her question tapered off, there is no ellipses there to imply that? Strange. Lightning was arcing across the ground in circles some distance away, violently kicking up clouds of dust as it hit the ground. The wind started to pick up as well. That's never happened before. Eric's eyes, on the other hand, were trained toward the sky. "Is that your subtle aurora?" Jane looked up and saw that there were glowing lights in the sky, outlining the edges of clouds that were black as the night itself. "No, yes, let's go!" Jane jumped down and grabbed a handheld camera to get it on video, while Darcy hopped into the driver's seat and steered the trailer toward the lightning. "This is great, isn't it?" Jane asked with a goofy smile. "What the heck is going on here?" Okay, so Jane jumped down and grabbed a handheld camera to get it on video, while Darcy, for some reason there is a paragraph break between while and Darcy, though these are clearly the same sentence. And then there's another paragraph break after Jane's dialogue and the dialogue tag that goes along with it. It's so confusing. Like, what? Why is that like that? Was I like about to edit that out or something? I have no idea what's going on there. But Jane asks this question with a goofy smile plastered on her face as they sped toward the whatever it is. "Wait, you're seeing this too, right? I'm not crazy?" The trailer hit a bump and Jane teetered over the side before Selvig pulled her back inside. "Hold on, where is she?" "Okay, 1 minute." She jumped down and grabbed it. Okay, I'm confused. See, this is what I'm talking about. There's also no sense of blocking, because it's saying like Jane teetered over the side. Is she leaning out of the window in the driver's side seat? Or is she still on top of the thing? There was no indication that she went back up on the roof. Good God. Anyway, that's debatable, Selvig finally answered. "Put your seatbelt on." The lightning on the ground intensified, getting taller and taller until it reached up and touched the funnel reaching down from the clouds. Jane climbed into the passenger seat and leaned out of the window with her camera. "All right, there we go. You gotta get closer so I can take a magnetic reading." Darcy snorted. "Yeah, right, good one." Jane leaned back inside and gave her a look. "You're serious? Look how big it is! You don't have to get that close. Do you want those credits or not?" Darcy reluctantly put the thing back into drive and headed towards it. Jane moved from the window and back to the roof. The roaring winds whipped Jane's hair around her face. All three of them jumped when a huge bolt of lightning struck down from the center of the funnel. Darcy brought the trailer to a screeching halt once more, and Darcy brought the trailer to a screeching halt once more, and Selvig had to grab Jane again. "Keep the credits," she yelled up, her eyes widening at the sight of the monster's sting. "I'll intern at Burger King." "What are you doing?" Darcy threw the truck into reverse. "Saving our lives!" She backed up and started to pull away when Jane hopped down and jerked the wheel away from her. They tussled over it, the trailer swerving left and right until Darcy let out an ear-piercing scream and they screeched to a halt again. Jane fell back into her seat, breathing heavily. "What was that all about?" Selvig asked, bewildered. Darcy gulped audibly. "I saw someone." Jane's eyes widened and then she got up and got some flashlights. Good God. I always forget that this actually happens in the movie. Like, ugh. It's just that in the current version of Keep Breathing, there is 100% less like wacky action happening and more just like people walking through the woods and then Bifrost. Like, it's not all of this, "Get in the trailer, we're gonna go, Jane's falling over the edge, oh no, catch her, Selvig." Like, it's not. Like, it's interesting to see how tonally different these, especially these first drafts, are from the current versions of the story, because one of the big things with this story especially is that I just felt like it felt so weird and out there. This is a problem that I also had with part 3, but it's still to a lesser extent than this. But you'll see that when we read the draft of part 3 a little bit further down the line. So anyway, the air was thick with dust as the three of them emerged from the trailer. The small beams of the flashlights barely cut through the darkness. Jane started cursing under her breath. "God, I can't see a thing." "I think that was legally your fault," Darcy said, finally coming back to herself. Jane narrowed her eyes. "Are you sure you saw someone?" "She definitely did," Selvig said, spurring the both of them toward his voice. There was a huge man sprawled out on the ground in front of him. His clothes were burned in many places, and his long blonde hair was spread around his head in messy waves, obscuring his face. Go get me the first aid kit, Jane said as she kneeled by his side. We don't need that, Darcy said dismissively. We don't know this guy, and we don't know what's wrong with him, Jane said firmly. Besides, you're about to fall over as it is. She heard a sigh, and then one of the lights turned away. Come on, big guy, she said, brushing the hair out of his face. Do me a favor and don't be dead, okay? Open your eyes and look at me. He didn't move, and Jane let out a sigh, but then his eyes shot open. He looked up at her in confusion, and their eyes met a moment, his deep blue staring into her brown ones. Her lungs gave a squeeze, and then she blinked herself out of his gaze. What are these? What's what? Jane asked, looking up at Darcy when she'd return. These? She put down the kit and shined the light on her hand, which was holding a flower. I've never seen this before. Me neither. Let me see that. Where did you find this? Whoa. Oh, what now? Does he need CPR? 'Cause I know CPR. When Jane turned back, she saw that the man was looking up at them now. She rolled her eyes. Darcy, he's not even unconscious. Jane started, fumbling around in her jacket. We need to get him to a hospital, Eric said. After we get a reading? Immediately. Okay. Wait, she said, looking up toward the sky. Where did he come from? The man let out a groan, causing Jane to jump and fall. He raised himself shakily from the ground and then put out a hand to help her up. He lifted her so easily her feet left the ground for a moment. Thanks, she stammered out, rubbing her wrist. Are you okay? He didn't seem to pay her any mind, instead wandering around like he was looking for something. Hammer, he muttered. Yeah, we can tell you're hammered. That's pretty obvious, Darcy said offhandedly. Hey guys, look at this. She shined her flashlight on the ground, revealing lines that looked like they'd been etched into the dirt. Jane pulled out a camera and started taking pictures of it. We've got to move fast before anything changes. We need soil samples, light readings. She replaced the camera and pulled out her own light meter and her notebook to take some. Where did he go? Jane, we should really get him to a hospital, Selvig said. Not right now. It'll take too long. County's an hour away. She scooped some soil into a canister with a plastic spoon. We'll drop him off after we're done here. He seemed fine anyway. Father! A voice suddenly yelled from the darkness. Heimdall! I know you can hear me. Open the bridge. Okay, you and Darcy take him to the hospital. I'll stay here. I'm not leaving you out here in the middle of the night. You! Darcy jumped back as the man was suddenly standing right next to her. What world is this? Oh, what? It's all right, friend, Eric said gently. We're going to get you some help. He put a hand on his shoulder, and the man shoved him away so hard he almost fell. Where am I? Answer me. You're in the desert outside of the town of Puente Antiguo, Eric told him curtly. What realm? Alfheim? Nordheim? New Mexico, Darcy said, reaching into her jacket and pulling out her taser. You dare threaten me, he said, stepping toward her, with so puny a... He stopped when she fired, and the wires sunk into his chest. When he fell back to the ground, Jane and Selvig both looked at her in shock. What? She shrugged. He was freaking me out. Selvig let out a sigh. Help me get him into the truck. An hour later, they were standing at the admissions desk in the county hospital. Selvig watched as the orderlies lifted the man onto a gurney, his arms still aching from having to do the same earlier. The next time you taser someone, he said, tapping Darcy in the arm, make sure they're already in the truck. Name? The admissions nurse asked. Jane started. He said his name was Thor? The nurse's long nails clicked loudly as they moved across the keyboard. And your relationship to him? I've never met him. Until she hit him, Darcy piped up. Grazed him, actually, Jane corrected. And you tasered him, she reminded her. Yes, I did, she admitted freely. Jane waved her off. The nurse raised an eyebrow. Must have been quite the spat. Going to need a name and a contact number. Here, Selvig said, reaching over Jane's shoulder and handing the nurse's business card. Let's go. That's the end of that chapter. Good God! Okay, number 1. Too long. Number 2. Jesus Christ, a lot happened. Oh my God. Okay, so reading this, it definitely just feels like I don't want to say trying to get stuff down, but this definitely hews a lot closer to the movie than any other version of this story. From the fact that it actually takes place in the desert down to just the dialogue that's exchanged here and the pure action as well. Because even in the later version that we'll read in the second batch of these drafts, that version doesn't have the same amount of like, whoa, happening in it at all. Even though it preserves a lot of the same like dialogue moments and stuff. I'm just kind of taken aback by how much happened in that. Like, it's too much. There's too much rolling around and yelling, and I don't even know, like, when someone is in the trailer or when they're out of the trailer, when they're falling out the trailer, when they're falling in the trailer. Like, ugh. It's confusing. That's what it is. It's kind of a mess. I guess writing wise, the chapter is okay. There are some like kind of unforgivable things with the fact that, again, it is so confusing because sometimes there's just no indication that a person has moved somewhere or where they have moved. Otherwise, it seems like it's on par with the stuff that we read from Captain America last episode, but I would argue that the Captain America stuff was actually better than this. Yeah, sure, it felt like Bucky and Steve were sometimes walking through a void, but at least I knew they were walking and it was just calm. They were talking to each other and that's it. Like, oh God. Anyway, let's move on to chapter 2 of this. After a frantic night fueled purely by caffeine and excitement, the trio were still at work as the sun started to rise. Darcy had finally gave out and gone into autopilot and was now drowsily pinning photos on the corkboard on the wall as they came out the printer. Jane was still just as energetic somehow, soldering a piece of equipment back together while giving out orders to Darcy and having another conversation on the phone. "When you get done, take the soil samples to Professor Myers in geology," she said without looking up. "Remind him he owes me." She started muttering into the phone again as Selvig stepped out of the kitchen with more coffee. We might want to do a spectral analysis," he said as he sat down a cup beside her. Hold on, Sue." "We?" she asked, finally looking up. He shrugged. "I flew all the way out here. I might as well make myself useful." Jane's eyes lit up. "You know what would be really useful?" she started, getting up and moving to the other side of the room. The piece of equipment she was working on rose from the table and floated along behind her, and then sat itself on top of a rack-mounted server next to her. "Do you still have that friend at LEGO? Can you call in a favor? Because if I'm right, their observatory must have picked up the gravitational waves during last night's event." Selvig raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "One second, Eric." Jane turned back to her cell phone. "I have to call you back, Sue. Tell Reed I said hello and that I might need to talk to him. And congratulations," she added before she ended the call. "On what?" Darcy asked. "John lit himself on fire in the shower this morning," she explained as she waved Eric back toward a monitor back near her desk, playing back the footage she got last night. Huh! Jesus Christ. "Anyway, I was saying that it means that these anomalies might signify something bigger." She paused the video at a point where the pitch-black sky suddenly opened up to reveal stars. "How big are we talking?" he asked as he inspected it. "I think the lensing around the edges is characteristic of an Einstein-Rosen bridge." "Oh, what?" Darcy said as she pinned up something else. Selvig squinted at her. "I thought you were a science major." "Political science," she clarified. Selvig shot a puzzled look towards Jane, who just shrugged. She was the only applicant. "An Einstein-Rosen bridge," Selvig explained, "is a theoretical connection between two different points in space-time." "Oh," Darcy responded with a slow nod. "So like a space bridge?" "A wormhole," Jane corrected. "That's what I said." Jane got up and grabbed the latest screenshot from the printer tray. "Eric, look, what do you see here?" She pointed to the same bubble in the sky that she had on the screen. "Stars," he answered bluntly. "Exactly. We couldn't even see the moon last night, and it was supposed to be full, but suddenly the stars come back, and you said that it happened before." "Yeah, but this time around they weren't our stars." So let me pause right here. I want to rewind just a scotch back to Jane on the phone talking to what appears to be Sue Storm. Why? So number one, back in the day, the Fantastic Four, I guess, were supposed to exist in this universe. And if you remember last episode, I explained how this universe used to be more about actual covens and it drew a lot of inspiration from American Horror Story, sort of. So I think Sue was in the same coven as Jane and Pepper and a few other characters. So, I mean, I understand why she's calling her here, but this literally just feels like it's there for no reason. Like, it's like, oh, you know who else exists in this universe and who she should be on the phone with? This person. And it's like, why? What does that have to do with anything, you know? Now, What I'll say is that, like I said, in the current version of Keep Breathing, yes, there is a scene where Jane is on the phone with Pepper, and it's sort of a reference back to the stuff that was happening in part 3. But it's a small moment, and you don't even hear the conversation that they're having. It's just like she says to Eric when she's on the other phone, because she's texting Pepper, and she's like, "Oh, something happened with my cousin. Shut up, I don't always multitask." And that's it. You don't even hear Pepper's voice. That's it. So it's not exactly the same thing. Like, yes, there is that same type of reference, but instead of her deliberately being like, "Oh, tell Reed I said hi and I might need him," not even like, it would be different if she had called Sue so she could talk to Reed about what happened. I would totally like accept that because it would be relevant to what's going on. But she's talking to Sue about Sue's brother lighting himself on fire in the shower, apparently. What does that have to do with anything? I just think the story really needed less references and more actual story. She opened a drawer across the room and a star chart floated to her. She put a few things on the floor and spread it out over a spare table. This is the alignment for our quadrant at this time of year, so unless Gemini decided to take a day off, those are someone else's stars. After you hang that, could you refill my cup? Sure. Darcy yawned through her hand as she pushed the thumbtack in. There's something in that one, she said as she got up, like a shadow or something. Jane and Selvig leaned in to take a closer look. They were next to it. Where? The layout of this lab. What is it? What is it? Good God, again, with the spaces, there's no sense of space here. Not even like Darcy is doing this against this wall and Jane's computer is against this. Like nothing. Just they're suddenly like with no indication. Apparently Darcy was just standing next to them the whole time, I guess. I don't know. Jane and Selvig leaned in to take a closer look. Is that? Selvig trailed off as he eyed the dark shape. It was right in the center of the cloud, but it was unmistakably a body. I think I left something at the hospital, Jane murmured. Just then there was a scream, and Jane closed her eyes and reached out into the open air before the inevitable sound of breaking glass could follow. Darcy? She called out, but there was no answer. She got up and went into the kitchen herself. Darcy, what the... She let out a gasp, and the coffee pot fell to the ground anyway. What are you two doing? Selvig asked from the lab. We don't need to go to the hospital, Jane responded. Somehow, Thor was right outside of the sliding glass door, still wearing his hospital gown even. Darcy was still frozen in the middle of the room as Jane let him in. How the hell did you get here? I walked, he answered matter-of-factly. I didn't mean to startle you. It's fine, but how did you find your way back? You were unconscious most of the way there. Darcy, clean that up. The instructions seemed to bring her back. You did it. Jane narrowed her eyes. You dropped it. I'm not arguing about it. Come on, she said, grabbing Thor by the arm. Let's get you some clothes. Selvig gaped as Jane led him into a room in the back of the building. Where did he come from? She shrugged and opened the door. The hospital, apparently. But we can't just let him in. One moment. She ducked back into the room, rifled through a few drawers and pulled something out and left him to it before she responded to Selvig's concerns. He's my most important piece of evidence, she said in a slightly hushed tone. I want to know what that thing was, and he might have the answers. Jane moved back to the corkboard and drew a circle around the bubble of stars with a white marker. She ignored the sounds of glass falling through the door. Let me go help her, Selvig said, excusing himself. A few moments later, when the two returned, Darcy collapsed into a chair. Is it cold in here? She asked. Jane let out a sigh. You know, for a crazy homeless guy, she said, pointing toward the door left ajar, he's pretty cut. Thor emerged from the back room without his shirt on. Hey, sorry I tased you. He looked at her amusedly before he wandered over to Jane's desk and started messing with her stuff. Excuse me, she said, slapping his hand away. Please don't touch those. He looked at the shirt she'd given him in confusion, eyeing the name tag on the chest that read Donald Blake, M.D. Jane ripped it off. My ex, she explained. They're the only clothes I had that'll fit you. They will suffice. You're welcome. Now, tell me. She steered him toward the corkboard on the wall and pointed toward the picture with the shadow. What were you doing in that? So, can I pause real quick just to explain something with Darcy that's not super clear in this version? Darcy, the way that her powers work, because she does have powers, is that she has, like, healing, well, not healing powers, but she has the ability to manipulate living tissue. So she can heal people, she can also hurt them, which I think does happen in this, actually. Either way, the thing is that Darcy's powers never turn off, so it drains her of energy. And if I'm remembering, I don't remember if it's a thing in this one exactly, but in some other versions, Darcy also suffers from a chronic illness. So not only do her powers not turn off, but they're constantly healing parts of her body that are then deteriorating anyway. So it's just a constant cycle of falling apart and then being healed again. So that drains her of additional energy. And that's why Jane is like, oh, you're already falling over as it is. That's what she's referring to here, her being tired all the time. The story isn't doing a super good job of conveying that this is the thing, but that is what's going on. Now, my problem is that if Jane knows that Darcy has this issue, as she clearly does, she's referenced it multiple times, why does it not seem like she's like doing anything to help Darcy out here? In this version, Darcy's a lot older than, well, a lot, but she's quite a bit older than she is in later versions where she's actually a teenage girl. Number one, she has Darcy up all night apparently, and then when she tells her to clean up the broken tea or coffee pot in the kitchen, Darcy like clearly is having trouble and she hears the sound of it and like the glass is falling and she just ignores it. And then Selvig's like, let me help her. And then when she comes back in and flops down on the couch, clearly like drained, Jane's just like, oh my God. You know, it's really weird. Like, I understand that also in this version, Darcy, I don't think is like related to Jane or even like a relation of any sort. So I understand that here Darcy is just like an intern. But it just seems kind of weird and callous for her to hire someone, know about this, and then treat her like this. But I guess this is small potatoes. So moving on. What were you doing in that? Oh, what anyone does in the Bifrost, he said nonchalantly. Jane quickly grabbed her notebook and jotted the word down. Selvig crossed his arms skeptically. And what exactly is the Bifrost? She asked next. This mortal form grows weak. Jane squinted up at him. Does that mean you're hungry? He just looked at her. Someone get the mortal a Pop-Tart. A Pop-Tart wasn't enough, though, and neither were two, or three, or the rest of the box. Jane, very reluctantly, dragged them all down the street to Isabella's diner when Thor continued to complain about how weak his mortal form had grown. The plates began to pile up on their table very quickly as Thor kept ordering more and more food. He was on his third plate of steak and eggs before Jane decided to move in. Now, she started, opening up her notebook expectantly, tell us exactly what you saw last night. Thor shoveled another forkful of eggs into his mouth instead of answering. And maybe start with how you got inside that cloud? And how you could eat an entire box of Pop-Tarts and still be this hungry, Darcy added, stealing a pancake and pulling it onto her own plate. Jane shot her a look. This drink, I like it, Thor said after he downed a mug of coffee. He smashed it on the floor. Another! The waitresses all jumped, and Isabella glared in their direction. Sorry, Izzy, Jane said with a nervous laugh. Just a little accident. She turned to Thor quickly. What was that? He looked at her in confusion. It was delicious. I want another. Then just say so. I just did. She rolled her eyes. No, I mean ask for it. Nicely. I meant no disrespect. Then no more smashing. Deal? He stared at her for a moment, and she looked down to avoid his eyes. You have my word. Good. So, as Jane started rattling off questions at him, two of the locals ambled in, looking like they'd been up all night. Morning, Pete. Jake, Isabella said as they sat down at the counter. The usual please, Izzy, Pete said, rubbing his chin. Jake yawned. You miss all the excitement down at the crater. What crater? Isabella asked, sliding them their mugs. Jane and Selvig both perked up. Darcy nudged Jane with her foot. Are you going to ask him about his eyes? She said through a mouthful of applesauce. Jane shushed her. They're saying some kind of satellite crashed in the desert, Pete explained to Isabella. We were out having a good time with it till the feds showed up and chased us out. Jane straightened at the sound of that. Excuse me, did you say there was a satellite crash? Yup, Jake said back to her. They said it was radioactive. He looked down, and I had my hands all over it. Damn. What did it look like? Selvig asked. Jake shrugged. I don't know nothing about satellites, but it was heavy, real heavy. Nobody could lift it. Thor looked up at him and then jumped to his feet, nearly upsetting the table. He strode over to Jake and grabbed him by the shoulders. Where? His eyes widened. 12 miles east of here. Thor smiled, which caused Jake to widen his eyes even more, and then he went straight for the door. I wouldn't bother, Pete said after him. Looked like the whole army was coming in after we left. Jane got up and followed him out. Where are you going? "12 miles east of here," he answered without breaking step, him being Thor. "Oh, why?" "To get what belongs to me." She raised an eyebrow. "So you own a satellite now?" He finally stopped and looked back at her. "It's not what they say it is." "Well, whatever it is, the government seems to think it's theirs. You're just gonna walk in there and take it?" "Yes." Jane sighed. "If you take me there now, I'll tell you everything you wish to know." "Everything?" "All the answers you seek will be yours once I reclaim Mjolnir." "Mjolnir?" Darcy said as her and Selvig joined them outside. "What's Mjolnir?" Jane," Selvig started, pulling her aside. "Don't do this. You know what we saw last night. This can't be a coincidence. I want to know what's in that crater. I'm not talking about the crater. I'm talking about him. He's promised us answers. He's delusional. Listen to what he's saying. Thor, Bifrost, Mjolnir. These are the stories I grew up with as a child. I'd just be driving him out there. That's all. It's dangerous. He's dangerous." She started to argue, but then she thought about it and started to see his point. She moved back to Thor. "I'm sorry, I can't take you." "I understand. Then this is where we say goodbye." He took Jane's hand and kissed it. "Jane Foster, Eric Selvig, Darcy, farewell." He turned and started down the street again. "Now, let's get back to the lab," Selvig said with a nod. "We've got work to do." And that's where the chapter ends. So this chapter was slightly better. Slightly. It still has some of the same problems, but it's to a lesser extent, and the people aren't moving around as much. So I can kind of read past it as much as I possibly can. This chapter's still way too long. No sense of space. Things that I've said. This is rough. Okay. Now, what was I complaining about? I got through Captain America like way easier this time around. Jesus Christ. So let's move on to chapter 3. "Hey, that's my stuff." Jane looked in the opposite direction that the truck carrying her dark matter analyzer had gone and saw that it had come from the lab. There was a mess of other black cars like it parked outside. Selvig started to get nervous, but Jane marched toward the building angrily. The building was swamped with people in black suits carting out more of their things, the computers and her handheld gadgets, even the boxes of documents. Jane caught sight of an eagle emblem on the side of one of the trucks and groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." "Aren't these your people?" Selvig asked her, looking around in confusion. "They're supposed to be," she said as she stomped inside. "Phil, what the hell?" Agent Coulson stepped forward and pulled off his sunglasses. "Hello, Jane. What do you think you're doing with my stuff?" "We're investigating a security threat. We need to appropriate all of your equipment and atmospheric data." "You can't just come in and take all of this?" She stepped back and let out a sigh. "At the very least, you could have asked." "We're far past the time for asking." He pulled a check out of his pocket and handed it to her. "This should more than compensate for everything." She slapped it out of his hand. "I just can't go pick up replacements from the store. I made most of that stuff myself, you know that. And I know you can do it again." Man, she slaps it. She just, psh, I don't want that. She let out a sigh and put her hands on her hips. "Look, we're on the verge of understanding something extraordinary, and everything I know about this phenomenon is in this lab and in this book," she said indignantly, tapping the cover of her notebook. "No one has the right to take it from me, not even you guys." Another agent came by and plucked the book right out of her hand. She gaped as Coulson replaced his sunglasses. "Thank you for your cooperation." He stepped by them and went out of the door. "Can they do this?" Darcy started. "I mean, like, legally." "Hey!" One of the agents let out a small gasp as he took something from her hand, and Selvig pulled her back. "Easy, girl." "Victoria is going to hear about this," Jane shouted at them as they filed out of the front doors. "She already knows," Coulson said, stepping back into the doorway. "She ordered it." "Does Maria?" she said, narrowing her eyes. A few of the agents staggered a bit at the sound of that. "Of course she does," Coulson answered. He disappeared again before she could say anything else. "Why don't we step out for a moment?" Eric suggested, "until they go." Jane let out a defeated sigh and she followed him out through the kitchen. All right, so let's pause here. So that moment where she's like, does Victoria know about this? The question kind of makes sense because, well, Victoria is a high-ranking agent. I don't know if Coulson actually does answer to her. The Maria threat makes more sense because Maria is the deputy director of S.H.I.E.L.D. However, that also begs the question of why Maria would not know about this. Like... But what that actually is about is that it goes back to the whole coven thing. So this is actually explained later in the thing, if I'm remembering correctly. So you know what? Let's read a little bit further, and then we can talk about it. Years of research gone, she moped from the roof as they watched. Or excuse me. What? Moped from the roof as they watched. That's either supposed to be moped on the roof, or I'm trying to use mope as an adjective here, which is not how that works. But anyway, years of research gone. She moped from the roof as they watched the last of the trucks disappear into the desert. What about your backups? Selvig asked. Did you see the place? They took our backups. They took the backups of our backups. They took my iPod, Darcy added, lying back and staring up at the sky. They even took her iPod, Jane repeated, and then backtracked. What? Darcy put up her hands, and then Jane put her head in hers. God. Again, I ask, can they just march in and cart off all our stuff? Like, isn't this a violation of some constitutional right or something? I don't know, probably, but S.H.I.E.L.D's never been one to play by the rules. Oh my god. She crossed her arms over her chest. But I don't care. I'm gonna get my stuff back. I'll break a few rules of my own if I have to. I don't know, Jane. I don't think it's a good idea to go against the Supreme's orders. Isn't she just a standing Supreme? Darcy asked. Still a Supreme, Selvig said with a shrug. This isn't coven business. It doesn't count. Jane got to her feet. I need to find a phone and make some calls. Good, Eric said. Drop me by the library as well. I need to find something. He and Darcy followed her back downstairs and toward the trailer. Okay, so now we can talk about it. So, as said there, Victoria is apparently the Supreme of Jane's coven, so that's the threat she was lobbying. Like, I'll tell the leader of our coven that you're doing this, because Phil's also technically part of the coven, though I don't think in this version Phil has powers. There were a few moments in and out of the coven, like, timeline where Phil did have powers, but they were low level, and when he just straight up didn't. It's hard to tell which is which because there's no evidence of it in any of the written content I have, so he is as good as unpowered. But anyway, because he's related to them, he is still part of the coven. But when she's talking about does Maria, that thread I'm not entirely sure about, because Maria's not part of their coven, but I'm assuming it's because she is the deputy director of S.H.I.E.L.D. or just a higher up. Because at this point, I don't think I knew exactly what role she played in the actual agency, but I think that threat was more along the lines of, but what about the higher ups at S.H.I.E.L.D.? And they're all like, oh, we better get out of here. Because Maria is part of a completely different coven. That had nothing to do with that. But still, I just wanted to explain that a little bit before we kept going so it made sense, but the story did it, so hey. The local library was a small square building in the center of town. It didn't stand out against any of the other buildings there. Nondescript in white with a small sign hanging on the door that said free Wi-Fi. I'll just be a minute, Eric said as he jumped out. It's interesting how the library gets described, but literally nothing else does. What? Did they take your phone too? Jane asked Darcy. She nodded. God, I'm not going to be able to get through on a payphone. They block payphones. How much does it cost to call international, though? I've never used a payphone before in my life, Darcy said. Jane slumped down in the driver's seat. Damn. Hey, isn't that our friend? Jane looked up and saw Thor down the street as he went into a store. What's he doing? I don't know, Jane said, starting up the trailer. You're not gonna... Yeah, I am. She drove down the street and stopped in front of what turned out to be the local pet store. Thor turned around when she beeped the horn. Hey, need a lift? And that's the end, so I overestimated how much of this there was. But alright, so again, that was not even the actual end of the chapter, it's just where I stopped writing. Oh god, this chapter is also too long. So, overall, this is not very good. But again, this is my very first draft, so, and as I mentioned last episode, this document, especially this beginning part, is not necessarily in order of when I wrote it. It's in roughly the same order that it would be if it had been in Keep Breathing. So this is actually what I wrote first, and it shows. But when I think about it in the context of like early drafts of things that I've written in the past, it has a lot of the same issues. There is just a lot of stuff going on. But that's more a symptom of the movie than anything else. But the sheer word count of this is just too much. And it reminds me a lot, actually, of a story that we will be reading in the 2014 batch of stories, Lego Story, which is a fanfic I wrote based off of the video game Lego Marvel Superheroes. When we read through that, you will see that it also has a problem with being way too long. So I'm thinking that this might just be a thing that started to develop over time. Because if you remember back in like Batman Begins, this is not really a problem we had as much. In that story, chapters ranged wildly between monsters like the flashbacks that were thousands and thousands of words long, and then like the introductory chapters for both like Rachel and Gordon, which were probably 1,000 if that. But here, it's just like everything is a mile long. And I feel like this is just something that I started to do after a while. There are some other stories I had that were written in 2013 that also had monster chapters, but again, not to this extent and not this many of them. Now that we're done that, we're going to move on to this draft of part 2. This is only one chapter. I think there's a bit of a beginning of another chapter, but it's like basically a negligible amount of it. So let's get into this. It had been a long time since she'd been in this room. It was a lot emptier than she remembered, of course. All of the clutter that she knew had been removed over 5 years ago. It almost felt too clean. There wasn't so much as a pen mark on the painted white walls, and the desk was clear save for a telephone. She thought she felt something from whoever was in here last, a combination of adoration and competitiveness, but then she realized no, that was just nostalgia. Why did that note tell her to come here, of all places? She couldn't place where it had come from. It just appeared on her desk with a room number and a time. She was going to leave it alone, blow it off as some kind of prank, but she felt something on it, the slightest bit of hope, that faded away right after she'd picked it up. And that got her attention. But why here? She didn't even know whose office this was now. Betty gave a start when the phone began to ring. She started to doubt herself again. What if it really was a prank? Was that hope she felt on that note card genuine? What if the person on the other line was just some asshole co-ed who was going to wheeze out that she had 7 days and then hang up? Or something worse that was actually worth worrying over? Screw it, she decided. She could deal with it either way. Hello? There was silence on the other end, and then someone answered. Betty? Bruce? She staggered back a bit. What are you... How did you... Did you think I'd forget my old number? She smiled. Look, I'm sorry about all this undercover business. No, it's fine. I get it. She closed the door to the office and then sat down behind the desk. Where are you? I heard about what happened in Brazil. Yeah. She read the distress in his sigh. Things got out of hand. I'm not surprised. How did you get back stateside? I mean, are you in the States? Yeah, yeah, I'm back home. Sort of. Have I missed anything? In 5 years? She asked incredulously. He laughed. No, I mean since Brazil. Betty lowered her voice out of habit. They've gone into damage control, as far as I know. Blonsky's been to see Dad, but I don't know what about yet, she added mentally, and made a note to remedy that later. Shield's out looking too, apparently, but I don't think they have their heart in it. They usually don't, unless it benefits them. Watch out, they might ask you to join. They both laughed again. There was something peculiar about the silence that followed it, though. Betty, about what happened. You don't have to apologize. I don't know about that. But it wasn't your fault. Then why do I feel so responsible? She only just caught the crack in his voice. Oh, wow. I could ask you the same thing, but she wouldn't, because they'd already spent what little time they'd had together after the accident playing the blame game, and she'd spent most of the last 5 years trying to get herself out of that mindset. It was on her word that he even agreed to the ritual anyway. There she went again. Bruce only responded with a sigh. The sound of footsteps in the corridor got Betty to her feet. Listen, I have to go. Is there any way we could... I don't know. It's not really safe for me to be around. Of course. She shook her head. If something comes up, you know where to find me. Yeah. She put the receiver down just as the door opened. Betty? Leonard! She stood up straight and smoothed out her skirt. What are you doing down here? He raised an eyebrow. I could ask you the same thing. She tensed a bit, but didn't let it show. Prank call, she said with a nonchalant shrug. Can you believe it? He shook his head. I thought we left that back in the 90s. You're not too tied up to get lunch, are you? As long as it's in the next 7 days, we're clear. He laughed. Good. Yeah, I think technically that's the end of that chapter, but I'm gonna keep reading because it's literally only 2 paragraphs after this. Lunch passed without incident, though she couldn't help but feel a bit distracted. Leonard didn't really seem to notice, which was fine, but after, she wasn't really sure whether that was her doing or not. She also hoped he wouldn't notice her haste to part with him when she got back on campus. She had a call she needed to make. Betty waited until she was back in her own office and alone to pull out her cell phone and dial a number she hadn't seen in a while either. They let the phone ring for a while. And that's the end of that. Right away, miles better than what we just read. However, reading this, I do get the distinct feeling that this was written in either late 2013 or early 2014. That's decent. It's fine. It does read like something from 2013, but it drops a lot of the really annoying stuff from stuff at that time that makes it kind of like, I don't want to say bad, but just like hard to read. But there's a specific type of wordiness that's common in stuff from 2013 and early 2014 that I definitely felt there. But it wasn't so much that I, again, couldn't read this. So it was fine. Hey guys, Editing Frankie here. So that is the end of this reread. We will pick up with Keep Breathing in 2014, quote unquote. I'm basically coming in here because I actually don't know what the next reread is going to be, because this reread ended up getting moved a little bit out of order. So I have a Harry Potter reread recorded, but if you know what has happened with J.K. Rowling, I don't know if I actually want to post it because I don't feel like giving Harry Potter promo. So I'm not really sure what to do. So I'm just going to say you're going to have to see what the reread is when it gets uploaded next Monday. We might have that Harry Potter reread, which will be the last proper 2013 reread, or I might do the 2013/12 year in review video that I was going to do. One of the two. So whatever happens, I'll see you for that. If you like this video though, like it on the YouTubes, subscribe to the channel and you'll be updated on when the next video comes out or whatever the new video is when you are watching this. It would also be super helpful if you guys could check out the backlog. You can catch up on the last episode of this as well as checking out other rereads that we've done. And like I said, I will see you next week. Bye!